The first thing Eleanor Briggs noticed was the blood. It dripped from the stranger's boot onto the dry earth of her ranch yard, leaving a crimson trail beneath the blazing Wyoming sun. The rider swayed in the saddle as though every breath might be his last, and his exhausted horse stumbled toward the wooden gate before stopping on its own. Eleanor tightened her grip around the shovel she carried, unsure whether she was looking at a dying man, an outlaw, or another tragedy sent to steal what little life had left her. Ever since her husband had been buried beneath the cottonwood tree only 6 months earlier, trouble had arrived at her ranch more often than hope. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change a life and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who loves heartfelt frontier stories, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey of courage and compassion. The year was 1886, and the Briggs Ranch rested miles outside the growing frontier settlement of Sheridan. Eleanor was only 31, but grief had aged her beyond her years. Her husband, Nathan Briggs, had died after a winter cattle drive turned deadly during a blizzard, leaving behind a mountain of debt, a weather-beaten ranch, and a woman determined not to surrender everything they had built together. Most neighbors believed she would sell the property before the first snowfall. Others assumed greedy cattle barons would force her off the land within the year. Eleanor listened to none of them. Every sunrise found her repairing fences, branding calves, hauling water, chopping firewood, and fighting to keep the ranch alive with blistered hands and an unbreakable spirit. The stranger finally slipped from the saddle, but his legs failed beneath him before he touched the ground. Eleanor rushed forward without thinking, catching part of his weight as he collapsed beside the gate. Blood soaked through the torn sleeve of his shirt, and another wound stretched across his ribs beneath a battered leather vest. His face was bruised, his dark hair matted with sweat and dust, and exhaustion had hollowed his features. Around his neck hung a small silver cross, while tucked inside his coat she discovered nothing more dangerous than a worn Bible and a faded photograph of an elderly couple. Dragging a full-grown man into the house was harder than any chore Eleanor had faced since Nathan's death, yet she refused to leave him outside for the coyotes. She cleaned his wounds using every remedy she knew, stitched the deepest cut with trembling hands, and stayed awake through the night fearing each breath might be his last. By dawn, the stranger finally opened his eyes. His name, she learned over the following days, was Caleb Mercer, a former Union cavalry scout who had spent years drifting across the Western Territories working as a trail guide and ranch hand. While escorting a freight wagon, his party had been ambushed by desperate rustlers. He alone had escaped, barely alive. Although Caleb healed slowly, he insisted on earning every meal. Even while one arm remained bandaged, he repaired broken wagon wheels, sharpened tools, and mended sections of collapsed fencing. Eleanor protested at first, but she soon realized the ranch had not sounded this alive in months. The steady ring of a hammer replaced the silence that had haunted every corner of the property since Nathan's passing. Their quiet routine was interrupted when Silas Crow, the wealthiest cattle owner in the county, rode onto the ranch with several hired men. Crow had spent months pressuring Eleanor to sell her land because it bordered the river he desperately wanted for his expanding herd. He offered far less than the ranch was worth, believing a lonely widow could eventually be bullied into surrender. When Eleanor refused once again, Crow's smile disappeared. Within days, fences were mysteriously cut, several cattle vanished overnight, and someone poisoned the ranch well. Every new hardship seemed designed to crush her spirit, but Caleb refused to stand by while injustice spread across the valley. Though still recovering, he spent long nights patrolling the property beneath the stars. One evening he discovered fresh horse tracks leading toward Crow's grazing lands. Rather than seeking revenge, he quietly gathered proof, marking boot prints, collecting discarded branding irons, and asking neighboring ranchers about suspicious movements. His calm determination reminded Eleanor that courage did not always arrive with a gun. Sometimes it arrived with patience. As summer faded toward autumn, the Briggs ranch slowly came back to life. Calves grew healthy, the vegetable garden flourished, and neighboring families began helping one another after witnessing Eleanor's resilience. Widow Martha Collins brought jars of preserves. Young Samuel Reed helped repair the barn roof, Pastor Isaac Holloway organized volunteers after Sunday service to rebuild damaged corrals. What had once been an isolated ranch became the heart of a community that remembered the frontier survived only when neighbors stood together. Silas Crow grew furious as his plans unraveled. One stormy evening, he ordered his men to stampede Eleanor's cattle toward his own property, hoping she would lose everything before winter arrived. The thunder masked the sound of approaching horses, but Caleb heard frightened cattle bawling across the pasture. Despite the pain still lingering in his ribs, he mounted a horse and rode into the darkness beside Eleanor. Rain poured across the plains while lightning illuminated hundreds of panicked cattle racing toward broken fencing. Working together through the violent storm, they redirected the terrified herd away from the cliffs and back toward the safety of the valley. Several neighboring ranchers, awakened by the chaos, joined them without hesitation. Before sunrise, Crow's hired hands had been caught attempting to drive stolen cattle across the county line. Faced with overwhelming evidence and witness testimony, the sheriff arrested the men, and Crow's reputation collapsed almost overnight. The powerful rancher who had relied on fear discovered that greed could never outrun the truth forever. Winter arrived quietly that year. Snow covered the prairie in silver, but for the first time since Nathan's death, laughter returned to the Briggs ranch. Eleanor often found herself smiling without realizing it. Caleb never tried to replace the memories she carried. Instead, he honored them. Together they repaired Nathan's old windmill, restored the neglected orchard, and hung a fresh wooden sign over the entrance that read simply, Briggs Ranch, because Caleb believed the name deserved to live on. One cold December afternoon, Caleb prepared his horse to continue his journey west. He believed the ranch no longer needed him and feared becoming another burden in Eleanor's life. As he looked across the peaceful fields they had rebuilt together, he realized something surprising. The ranch had saved him just as surely as he had helped save it. Before he could ride away, Eleanor walked toward the gate where they had first met months earlier. This time there was no blood upon the ground, no fear in her eyes, and no loneliness weighing down her shoulders. There was only quiet gratitude for the unexpected mercy that had arrived disguised as a wounded stranger. Life on the frontier rarely offered perfect endings. The seasons still brought drought, storms, and uncertainty. Yet Eleanor had learned that grief did not have to be the final chapter of a person's story. Nathan's memory remained part of the ranch forever, but hope had found room to grow beside it. Caleb discovered that home was not always the place where someone was born. Sometimes it was the place where a broken heart was welcomed without question, where kindness asked for nothing in return, and where strangers became family through simple acts of compassion. Before we reach the ending, tell us in the comments. Kindness always finds a way. If you believe one act of compassion can completely change someone's future. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, share it with someone who believes in hope, write a heartfelt comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these inspiring frontier stories reach more people who need a reminder that even in the hardest seasons, kindness and second chances can still change lives. Years later, travelers crossing the Wyoming frontier often stopped at the Briggs Ranch for water, a warm meal, or a safe place to rest before continuing west. They rarely knew the history behind the welcoming gate. They did not know that one ordinary afternoon, a grieving widow had chosen mercy instead of fear when a wounded stranger rode onto her land. That single decision transformed not only 2 lives but an entire community, proving that on the rugged American frontier, the greatest strength was never found in a rifle or a fortune. It was found in a heart willing to open its gate when hope came riding in.